All right, so let's dive into something that I'm sure is familiar and frustrating to anyone who's spent time scraping the web. Cloudflare Error 1015. You shared a great article from your browser, and we're going to sort of try to crack the code on what this error actually means, and more importantly, how to get around it.
Yeah, it's a challenge that can definitely stop you in your tracks, but the solutions are out there,
Yeah.
and some are surprisingly simple once you understand the mechanics.
Okay, cool. So for those who haven't encountered it yet, can you explain what this Error 1015 is all about?
Well, think of it this way. Websites are like clubs, some more exclusive than others. Cloudflare acts as the bouncer, making sure things don't get too crowded. If you show up with 100 friends all at once, odds are the bouncer is going to turn you away. That's essentially what's happening with Error 1015. Cloudflare detects too many requests coming from a single source and blocks them to protect the site.
So when we're web scraping, our script is like that big rowdy group trying to barge into the club.
Exactly. And just like a good bouncer, Cloudflare has ways of spotting suspicious behavior, sending requests too quickly, using a common IP address that's known for scraping. These are all red flags. The rebrowser article you shared actually gives some really insightful examples of how Cloudflare analyzes these patterns, which I thought was fascinating.
Okay, cool. So the article mentions throttling as a key strategy. Is that like telling our rowdy group to chill out and enter the club one by one?
It's a good analogy. Throttling is all about slowing down the rate of requests. Instead of hammering the server with requests, you pause between each one, mimicking more human-like browsing behavior.
So instead of a stampede, it's more like a casual stroll into the club. Does that actually work?
It's surprisingly effective. The rebrowser article actually suggests starting with a delay of 1 second between requests and gradually decreasing it until you find the sweet spot. It's all about finding that balance between speed and stealth.
Makes sense. What if we've tried throttling and we're still getting blocked? The article also talks about rotating IP addresses, which sounds pretty sneaky.
Yeah, it's like changing disguises, right?
Yeah.
Instead of using the same IP address for every request, you switch it up to make it appear like multiple users are accessing the website. This throws off Cloudflare's detection algorithms, making it harder to identify you as a scraper.
I see. So it's like having a whole crew of people entering the club, each with a different look. But how do you actually do that?
This is where things get a bit more technical, but the rebrowser article actually provides a step-by-step guide that's surprisingly accessible, even if you're not a coding whiz.
Okay, cool. Do you think you could walk us through the key points?
Absolutely. They recommend using a service called ProxyRack. It has a massive pool of IP addresses that you can rotate through automatically. The article even includes a snippet of code demonstrating how to integrate this into your scraper.
Oh, cool. So you're basically telling the scraper, hey, put on a different hat every time you knock on this website's door.
Exactly. It makes it much harder for Cloudflare to connect the dots and realize it's all coming from the same source.
That's pretty clever. But with all this talk of disguises and sneaking around, it makes you wonder about the ethics of it all.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the article emphasizes that just because you can bypass these measures doesn't mean you should. Websites have these protections in place for a reason, and it's important to respect their rules.
So how do we walk that line between getting the data we need and being respectful? The article mentions official APIs as a solution. What are those?
APIs,
Hmm.
or application programming interfaces, are like the official channels that websites provide for accessing their data. Think of it as the VIP entrance to the club. You're allowed in, but there are still rules and limits. Many websites offer APIs as a way to give developers controlled access to their data, often with higher rate limits than you'd get with web scraping.
So it's like saying, hey, we know you're interested in our data. Here's the proper way to get it.
Precisely. It's a win-win situation. The website gets to protect its resources, and developers can access the information they need in a reliable and structured way.
Okay, so APIs sound like a great option. But what if the website you're interested in doesn't offer one? Are we just out of luck?
Not necessarily. The article mentions another intriguing option, web scraping APIs. These are specialized tools that handle the complexities of web scraping for you, including things like IP rotation and throttling. They're like expert navigators, guiding you through the data jungle and avoiding all the booby traps.
So if official APIs are like the VIP entrance, web scraping APIs are like having a skilled guide who knows the back alleys and secret passages of the data world.
That's a great analogy. They both help you get to the data you need,
Yeah.
but in different ways. Web scraping APIs can be a powerful tool, but it's crucial to use them responsibly and ethically. Just like with any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
That's an important point to remember. So we've got throttling, rotating IPs, official APIs, and web scraping APIs. It sounds like a pretty solid toolkit for tackling Error 1015. But what happens if you've tried all these strategies and you're still getting blocked? The article hints at some more advanced troubleshooting techniques.
Yeah, it's like being a detective. You have to analyze the clues, adjust your approach, and maybe even try some unconventional tactics. Sometimes you need to get creative to outsmart the bouncer.
I like that analogy. So what kind of creative solutions are we talking about?
Well, the Rebrowser article goes into some depth about analyzing error messages, understanding different Cloudflare challenge types, and even building more sophisticated scraping infrastructure.
Building infrastructure. That sounds pretty
It
intense.
can be, but it's like having a well-equipped lab for your data detective work. This could involve setting up a network of proxy servers, using headless browsers, or even incorporating machine learning to adapt to evolving website defenses.
So it's about taking your web scraping game to the next level.
Exactly. It's about becoming a master of disguise, a code-wielding ninja who can slip past any digital defenses.
This is all incredibly fascinating. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment of our deep dive.
Don't worry, we'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll continue our exploration of Cloudflare Error 1015 and delve into even more advanced strategies for navigating the world of web scraping. Stay tuned.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Welcome back. So we've been getting pretty deep into the technical side of dealing with Cloudflare Error 1015, but the Rebrowser article also touched on something I found really intriguing, the idea of building relationships with data providers.
Yeah, it's an often overlooked aspect of web scraping. We tend to focus on the technical hurdles, but sometimes the simplest solution is to just pick up the phone and talk to the people who own the data.
So instead of trying to outsmart the bouncer, we go straight to the club owner.
Exactly. Explain your project, your intentions, and why accessing their data is valuable. You might be surprised how many are open to collaboration, especially if you emphasize ethical data use and respect for their terms of service.
It seems counterintuitive, right? Like, why would they make it easier for someone to scrape their site?
Well, because there are benefits for both sides. For you, it could mean more reliable data access, potentially even a custom API just for your project. For the data provider, it could mean better understanding how their data is being used, maybe even leading to improvements or new features on their end.
So it's about moving beyond this adversarial scraper versus website dynamic and finding common ground.
Precisely. The Rerouser article gave an example of a research team that was constantly hitting error 1015. While trying to gather data for a climate change study, they eventually reached out to the website to explain their goals, and the site owners were actually thrilled to help. They ended up getting special API access and even some additional data sets they hadn't known about before.
That's awesome. It sounds like building these relationships can open doors that would otherwise remain closed.
Absolutely, and it can save you a ton of headaches in the long run. Instead of constantly battling rate limits and evolving defenses, you have a direct line to the source, ensuring smooth and ethical data acquisition.
Okay, so building relationships is key. But the article also mentions resilient infrastructure as an important part of avoiding error 1015. What does that even mean in the context of web scraping?
Imagine this. You've got your scraper running smoothly, gathering data like a well-oiled machine. Suddenly, the website makes a small change. And boom, your scraper crashes. Resilient infrastructure is about building a system that can handle these kinds of bumps in the road without completely falling apart.
So it's about having a backup generator for your data operation.
That's a good way to put it. The Rebrowser article recommends a few key elements. First, diversify your proxies. Don't rely on a single provider. Spread your requests across multiple services to reduce the risk of a single point of failure.
Okay, so if one proxy goes down, you've got others ready to pick up the slack. Makes sense. What else?
Error handling is crucial. Instead of letting your scraper crash when it hits a snag, build in mechanisms to retry requests, pause and adjust settings, or even notify you so you can intervene. It's like having a self-healing system that can adapt to changing conditions.
That's a pretty cool concept, and it sounds like it could save you a lot of time and frustration. Any other tips for building resilient infrastructure?
The Rebrowser article also highlights the importance of version control for your scraper code. Think of it like saving different drafts of a document. If you make a change that breaks your scraper, you can easily roll back to a previous working version.
So it's like having an undo button for your entire web scraping operation.
Exactly. It allows you to experiment, try new things, and quickly recover from any mistakes. It's a game changer for anyone serious about web scraping.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of dealing with error 1015, but before we wrap up, I want to touch on something the article mentioned briefly, alternative data acquisition methods. Is it ever possible to just avoid web scraping altogether?
Sometimes the best way to win a game is to play a different one entirely. Web scraping is a powerful tool, but it's not always the only solution or even the best one.
So what are some of these alternative paths to data?
Well, the Rebrowser article briefly mentioned public data sets, which are like gold mines of information just waiting to be explored. Governments, research institutions, companies, they all release data for public use, often for free.
So instead of sneaking into the club, we're just walking into a library with open doors.
Precisely. And these data sets are often meticulously curated and formatted, making analysis a breeze. Think census data, economic indicators, weather patterns. You name it, there's probably a data set out there for it.
That's amazing. It seems like we often forget about these readily available sources of information. What other alternatives are there?
Don't underestimate the power of manual data collection. It might sound old school, but sometimes the most valuable insights come from direct observation surveys or interviews.
So putting on our detective hats and doing some good old-fashioned field work.
Exactly. Imagine you're researching consumer trends. Instead of scraping product reviews, why not spend a day observing shoppers in a store, noting their behavior, or even conducting short interviews? You'll get a depth of qualitative data that no scraper can match.
That's a really good point. It's like the difference between reading a travel blog and actually visiting a place yourself. Both have value, but firsthand experience offers a different level of understanding.
Precisely. And these alternative methods can often be combined with web scraping for a truly comprehensive approach. Imagine using public data sets to identify broad trends, then employing web scraping to gather specific data points, and finally conducting interviews to gain deeper insights.
It's like having multiple tools in your data detective's kit, each with its strengths and weaknesses.
Exactly. The key is to be adaptable, strategic, and always consider the ethical implications of your data collection methods.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've explored so many facets of dealing with Cloudflare Error 1015, from technical workarounds to building relationships and even finding alternative data sources.
It's amazing how much depth there is to this topic, and we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, but unfortunately that's all the time we have for this segment of our deep dive.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll wrap things up and explore the broader implications of web scraping in today's data-driven world. Stay tuned.
We've spent the last 2 segments really digging into the nuts and bolts of web scraping and how to navigate those pesky Cloudflare Error 1015 roadblocks. But before we wrap up, I'd love to get your take on the bigger picture. The Rebrowser article briefly mentioned OpenAI's API as a potential resource, but it left me wanting to know more. How do tools like that fit into the world of web scraping?
Oh, that's a great question. OpenAI's API and others like it represent a really interesting evolution in how we access and use data. Instead of scraping websites directly, you can tap into these massive language models that have already processed huge amounts of information.
So it's like having a super-powered research assistant who's already read every book in the library.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. You can ask these models questions, generate summaries of complex topics, even translate languages, all without having to worry about scraping websites, setting up proxies, or dealing with rate limits.
That sounds incredibly powerful, and maybe even a bit intimidating. How does someone even begin to use tools like that effectively?
Well, the learning curve can be a bit steep,
Hmm.
but the Rebrowser article actually had a great point about this. They emphasize the importance of understanding the strengths and limitations of these AI tools. It's not just about plugging in a question and getting a perfect answer.
So you need to be a bit more discerning, not just take everything the AI spits out as gospel.
Exactly. You need to critically evaluate the output, understand potential biases, and use your own judgment to determine how best to incorporate that information into your work.
That makes sense. It's like having a brilliant but sometimes quirky research assistant. You value their insights, but also know when to double-check their work.
That's a great way to put it. The Rebrowser article also made a point that really stuck with me. They said that these AI tools, powerful as they are, don't eliminate the need for traditional web scraping.
Really? Why is that? I would think AI would make scraping obsolete.
Well, there will always be situations where you need very specific data, maybe from a niche website or a data set that hasn't been incorporated into the AI's training data. That's where web scraping still shines.
So it's about having a diverse set of tools, knowing when to use a scraper and when to call upon the AI oracle.
Precisely. And who knows what the future holds?
Mm-hmm.
The way we interact with data is constantly evolving. And I think we'll see even more integration between AI and web scraping techniques.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We've learned how to outsmart Cloudflare, the power of building relationships with data providers, the importance of resilient infrastructure, and even how AI is changing the game.